Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Very good day to you. Welcome. This is our brand new set, Pregnancy to Parenting, still getting used to it. It's lovely, and we love how a baby has now matured, going to start toddler stages, and still focusing, as always, throughout the baby and yourself, mommy, and the rest of the family. Nutrition, nutrition, nutrition. What are we feeding our babies? What are we feeding our children? And what are we eating? But as last we spoke to Kath from NutriPed, that was on newborn nutrition. We now look as a follow-up on toddler nutrition, and that is with regards to weaning, feeding, when to start feeding, bottle fed, all this confusion about what to feed, when to feed, how do you even start, is what we're going to deal with today. I'm Hawa Solomon. I'll be with you for the next hour or so stay with us. A very good day to you, Catherine. Welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me back.
It's been a while, but we want to now focus on where we left off. And that was somewhere with the formula, and just to recap on newborn nutrition, because it has been a few weeks now. So looking at newborn nutrition, where we left off, and what we still need to know about formula feeding.
I think the main thing we would kind of discuss, and there might come a time when you're not able to breastfeed, either through maybe an illness or through going back to work. And I think we mentioned that it's quite a challenge because we don't have a very supportive infrastructure in our country for working moms. And so that means that formula is inevitable. And as we said, kind of alleviate fears. Our formulas are very good out there. Breast is always best. But if you do need a formula, you can rest assured that there are some really good ones out there on the market. Just make sure it's an infant formula and not just a powdered milk or a condensed milk or something in a tin. So or an evaporated milk. You really want a good infant formula. And you can get them from your various shops and just mix them according to the instructions on the tin. And something else just to remind our moms about is not to kind of dilute or change what is said with regards to mixing, because I think that is also something that can be quite harmful to a baby, because it either gives too little nutrition or too much nutrition. And then just to follow the formulas and stick with the formula for at least 2 weeks before just jumping off the bandwagon, because it takes about 2 weeks for a baby's little digestive system to adapt to a formula, and if you keep hopping around, you're never quite going to know which one works best. And get advice from one or two people, but don't get advice from everyone, because everyone will have a different piece of information and you'll be so confused because there is such a variety out there.
And deciding on the formula, and when you have decided, fine, and of course with advice, please, with your medical practitioner, and somebody like yourself in pediatric dietitian, looking at any problems that baby might have that concerns you, because they say often there are changes when it comes to breastfeed if you did that transition, or when formula fed babies, they're a little bit different, whether it's their poo, whether it's just something. Are there any sort of areas of concern that mommy can watch out for, whether it is with feeding or behavior or the poo?
I think that's very good. There's probably 3 areas that you're going to look at. Is the baby excessively cramping and really uncomfortable? Is the baby stool, often they get very constipated, and that's quite normal when you switch to formula, so give it a bit of time, but it should alleviate within those 2 weeks. If it doesn't and it gets progressively worse, then you definitely need to alert your healthcare practitioner or midwife
being a bit
about it. And then if the baby could also have diarrhea, or they could do projectile vomiting. So if your baby is spitting up, but actually maybe projectile vomiting way more than what your baby was, that is a concern, because obviously if more comes out than what's gone in, that's not good. And so there are cases then where you would need to relook at a formula and maybe decide on an alternative formula. But otherwise, if your baby's just a bit niggly and stools are a little bit hard, but they are coming, just give it a bit of time to work its way through.
And if there's a history in your family or with your children that maybe everybody was on a soya-based formula, or everybody was on a milk-based formula, is that what you should kind of stick to, or start with?
I think we do that naturally as moms. I think I've even did that with my kids, knowing even what I was on and thinking, well, that would make sense. But it's not, unfortunately, grounded in a lot of science. So I would say that I would start with a good standard formula before choosing a whole lot of different formula. I think if the siblings possibly were, if you had a very allergic child as your first child and now your second child, and you maybe don't want to go through that same journey, you could possibly go to the last formula that worked. But every baby is unique, and I think getting advice for your individual baby is always a good idea.
So let's start on weaning.
Okay.
How do you do this? When do you do it? What are the possible signs? Do you need special crockery? Is there an environment you need to be in? What are the other factors that makes you decide that baby is now ready?
Firstly, I think the most important thing is that us as moms, we have an amazing intuition, and this also comes to the weaning. So there's a lot of people out there with books and telling you when to wean, how to wean. Your medical person, you'll get different answers maybe as to when and how to wean. But there's something that a mom just knows, and I can see it regularly when moms come to me for weaning advice. They just know that their baby's either ready, or they'll tell you a story where someone suggested their baby was ready and they felt their baby wasn't, and they were spot on. So that's the first thing, listen to your intuition. However, we do know that it's very safe to wean your baby between 4 months to 6 months of age. At one stage we were saying wait till 6 months, only at 6 months. But we know now that it's 100% safe anytime after 17 weeks. So I always say to my moms, don't get all worried now that we've changed our minds and we're saying between 4 and 6 months. See it as an opportunity for you to say when you and your baby are ready. So that's your area of autonomy that you can decide. Things that your baby will show that they're ready would be, for example, that they are able to hold their head up. That's just a bit easier way to feed a baby with a head that can hold, exactly, than a floppy head. They will be more alert. So obviously a baby under the age of 3 months is not alert at all. So your over 4-month-old baby is definitely more aware of what's going on, follows you, mimics you a lot closer. So that's also a sign. Sometimes the milk feeding's been going really well. You're in a nice rhythm, like we spoke about last time, and suddenly you're having to feed like regularly all the time. And you're having to add in lots more breastfeeds or a whole lot more bottle feeds, or the baby was sleeping for a longer stretch at night, so now they're re-waking. I always say to moms, fix the milk as much as what you can, because the solids are not going to give an instant cure for more energy. But then that might be a sign that the baby's going to need more food, and they often won't settle until you do start introducing solids. And your baby just generally showing an interest. Sometimes their weight levels off a bit, and no matter what you do milk feeding wise, you notice that their weight is leveling off. And then the closer they get to 6 months, the more you need to consider it. So by 6 months you really want to have started solids, because then they need other nutrition that the milk is not going to be able to give them. So those are the signs that you would really look for. Your environment needs to be interactive, and I think that's important. Is that in the beginning, eating is a skill. It's not going to solve sleeping problems. It's not going to solve nutritional problems. You need to meet nutritional needs and sleeping sorted out with the milk, energy, and proteins. Your solids initially are teaching your baby how to eat. So it needs to be done at a very interactive time of day, in an environment where your cell phone's not ringing, your other kids are not running around hectically. Quiet, focused time, because you're teaching this little one a new skill. You don't need fancy equipment. I'm not a big fan of the high chair at all. I really like that kind of sitting on mom's lap, being part of kind of the whole mealtime experience with mom. That's always my preference. At a later time, should a high chair become necessary, that can be considered. But I always think it's lovely to initially start a baby off in a very comfortable little place. And it can be with just a basic spoon. Don't have to go and spend fortunes on fancy baby cutlery and crockery. They're very cute things out there, and you can do that.
Temperature ones.
Yeah. So there are lots of lovely ones out there, but it's not necessary. And I think we sometimes have so many things we need before we have a baby. It seems so out of reach, but it really can be simple. It can be off your plate. If you are eating healthy and your food is fairly basic and healthy and simple, then it can be off your plate. So your environment really needs to keep it simple, keep it interactive, and in a very relaxed time of day. Your baby mustn't be starving when you're going to give it its first solids, because it doesn't know how to eat. So it's very unfair to give a starving baby something they don't actually have the skill to do. So feed them their milk. If they need to sleep, let them sleep. Then when they're in that playful mode, that's when you introduce your first solid.
What do you expect? And I want to look at what to expect a little bit later on, because it can be quite messy. I've heard mom says, lay the floor with newspaper.
Absolutely.
I want to talk about that later. But what more importantly we need to look at now is maybe finding out how much we need to give the baby on the first feed, and that very first food. What is the quantity? I've heard a teaspoon, a tablespoon, an entire bowl. So and also what do you expect from baby when you do get it, to know that, listen, I'm on the right track?
So the first thing is obviously also what choices of food are you going to also give your baby, and then the volume, as you say. So volume really, and because you're just teaching the baby how to feed, I normally say to moms, give about a tablespoon, of which off a baby spoon they would probably eat about 1 to 2 teaspoons. And that's fine. And if they are this is what they're born to do and they love it, because some babies just take to solids like that's what they were meant to do, they might just polish that tablespoon off, and at the next one you can give a bit more. However, if you find that they really belabor through that first few little mouthfuls, then you'll be doing that amount for quite a while. So you need to be guided by them. The types of food that you would offer need to be fairly soft, but they don't have to be runny textures. They can be textured. So if you're going to make, for example, sweet potato, mash it just with a masher. You don't have to blend it and put it through this whole process and sieve and everything like that. Because rather give them a bit of texture. They've got to get used to something new. Get them used to a texture, then you don't have to wean them onto texture later on. So if you are going to go for the puree options, they go for more textured purees, go for veggies. I think veggies are wonderful starter foods, really, really good starter foods. And they're accessible, they're easy to do and easy to bring in.
Okay, we'll talk more on the type of food, the balanced diet, and what your baby needs during this first weaning stages. Stay with us. More on toddler nutrition after the short break. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back in segment 2 of Pregnancy to Parenting. Please note that you always make the show, so visit our Facebook page, Pregnancy to Parenting, like it and put down your questions, comments, queries. Tell us about your birth stories, your issues with your toddler, your newborn, whether they be happy or a bit struggling or challenging. We'd love to know, and it definitely adds to the production of the show, as we have lots and lots still to discuss. We're only somewhere with weaning our babies now, and in studio we have clinical pediatric dietitian Kath from NutriPeds. Please visit their website. They're also based out in Johannesburg and Cape Town. So just before the break, Kath, we were talking about the types of food to start off with. There's quite this confusion of like how they should be and how you should be mixing it, but I'm sure there's lots of instructions on the box if you're buying something off the shelves, and if you're making them, you are guiding us. And I believe also there's a new book out, so people can get that as guidance, and there's lots of other literature out there. But looking at what a toddler's balanced diet should be like, what should we be giving baby for the first few feeds, and the types of foods, as you mentioned, sweet potatoes, so we know that's on the list, but also milk feeding. When should they be getting their milk feeds? Is it before or after? And time of day, like you said, you're choosing that they're ready now to feed. So also maybe looking at their behavior, guide us through that.
So in the beginning, obviously you'll focus on keeping your milk routine very similar. Don't cut back on the volume of milk. Don't change around times of feeding. Keep that all in place, and then just fit that first solid feed in at a playful time. So it's not really about the nutrition at that point. So it doesn't really matter whether they've had their milk feed, whether they've had a sleep and they're waking up now to play. You don't have to link it directly with a milk feed.
It's more like an introduction.
It's just an introduction, and that your first few days or week will be like that with that one meal. And thereafter you're going to add a second meal in. by the time you've added your second meal in, at another happy time of day as well.
So you say day after, does that mean it's another day?
Yeah, so for example, if you spend the first 3 days just really teaching them about the food, what's having this other substances in their mouth, how to swallow something that's more solid, that's a technique that they've got to learn. Once they've got that right and they're not pushing the food out all the time with their tongue, that often means they're ready to add a second meal in. And then so you've got the first one organized, and then you can add the second one. Then you're going to start looking, by the time you get to adding your second one in, you're going to look at maybe then working out when do you fit in your milk and when do you fit in your solids. And I normally suggest that you fit it in between your milk feeds, because if you fit it straight after a milk feed, they often are not really that excited about taking in more nutrition because they're full. If you fit it in before a milk feed, they're often so hungry that they find it frustrating because they can't get that hunger satisfied as quickly as when they're drinking, and it's a bit frustrating for them. So,
and that's what they know as well.
Yeah, exactly. So rather do it in between. So you do a milk feed, maybe they go down for a sleep. When they wake up, you then give them their solids. And you can do that twice a day. And then you can add a third meal in. So sometimes a baby can take a third meal by the second week of solid introduction. Sometimes they can take up to 3 weeks before you add your third meal into the day. So those 2 meals are quite easy to fit in. It's often moms struggle, where do they fit their third meal in? Because it's difficult from a schedule point of view, and you almost feel like you feed in all the time. And that is how it feels when you go back to solid. When you start solids, it almost feels like that newborn phase of those close feeds, and it's a bit like that in the beginning. But it very quickly levels out, and so you just got to kind of ride and go with the flow. And a good intake, like we mentioned, will be starting at about 1 tablespoon of your first puree, and thereafter you can increase it accordingly. So if your baby's polishing off that 1 tablespoon, you can add a 2nd tablespoon. And if your baby's polishing that, you can add a 3rd tablespoon. So let your baby guide you. I really, really encourage, if you can, to start with the veggies and even some of the fruits. Try and avoid your boxed commercial foods as much as possible. They really have a lot more additives to them. The kind of yardstick I'd like to give moms is that the less processed a food is, in other words, the less hands that have been involved and machinery and stuff that's been involved in getting that food to your baby, the better off that food is, the more living that food is for your baby. You want food to be alive. Their bodies are alive, and you want to give them living food. And that means food that's going to go off, food that is kind of got to come from earth and be made. And so the more the food is processed and labeled, then you need to question, how good is this actually, and good is the nutrition for my baby. So starting with your veggies is a wonderful place to start, and then add in a 2nd veggie, and then add in a fruit as a 3rd meal. And then you can really add a new veggie every single day, because that really is a huge advantage to encouraging different flavors and tastes. So you don't have to wait 3 days between every new veggie that you add, because then you're going to take until they're teenagers to introduce the variety. So in the beginning, start with veggies and fruits and get them going, one new one every day, and go from 1 meal up to 3 meals.
Looking at why one would choose to not start weaning before 6 months, especially when the signs are really not there, and you have decided, oh no, I've bought this, I really want to try this baby food that I've made, or whatever the case may be, and you probably mistakenly see the signs. But talk to us about why those weaning months are delayed, and what is actually happening when you do choose to be feeding baby. There's no signs and of readiness, and you have chosen. So what's happening with baby's body if you're kind of forcing it?
Yeah, I think if you're forcing it, the baby's body is really going to indicate that either they developmentally are not ready. In other words, they just can't get that whole eating going, and it's just because orally maybe they haven't developed at that level. Babies are all different, just like some babies crawl at 6 months and others only crawl at 8 months. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong, it's just a developmental thing. And solids are similar. I really, though, would say don't introduce solids before 4 months of age, because that poses your baby at a higher risk of developing potential allergies. And don't delay it beyond 6 months, because that also poses your baby at a higher risk of developing allergies and fussy eating, because there's a very critical window period kind of anytime between 5 and 9 months, where your baby's very awake and alert to new flavors and textures. There's something going on there developmentally in the mouth and with all the taste buds, and you really want to harness that time. So that is when you want to introduce the majority of your textures and your flavors, and the different sours, the sweets, the savories, salty. Those are the type of flavors that you, even the bitter, that you want to expose your baby to in those early months there. So delaying it beyond 6 months is also not advantageous, because it's going to take you so much more time then to get all the foods into your baby.
And looking at the mistaken signs that we see, where we think, okay, baby's ready, she's doing this or he's doing that. What are those? Is there a list of
I think some of the things that we mistakenly think it means our baby's ready for solids would be that they put their hands in their fists in their mouth, and that can even happen between 2 and 4 months of age. And parents might think, oh, my child looks starving because his fists, he's trying to eat his fists. But he's not trying to eat his fist because he's hungry. He's eating his fist because he's realized he can put his fist to his mouth, and he's starting to mouth things. So it's actually the first step towards mouthing, which is one of the steps towards eating, but it's not a sign of hunger. It's a developmental step. Another thing that we sometimes mistake is if they do wake up for that extra milk feed. They just need an extra milk feed. They don't need solids. So especially if they're under 4 months of age. And then sometimes we also think if their weight's leveling off that they need solids, but they don't. They actually just need more calories from milk. And again, if they're under 4 months of age, it's not a good reason to introduce solid, just up the milk intake.
So preparing that first meal, as you said, no fancy equipment, mommy, just be there. And even if it's from your plate, from your hand to baby's mouth. What are the sort of reactions and expectations you can get from baby with that first feed, and what should you be tolerant about?
They could look like they're going to spit it out.
It
doesn't mean they don't like your choice of your first food. It just means that they don't know what to do with it. And we call it a tongue thrust, and that reflex is there up until about 4 months, where the tongue automatically pushes any foreign stuff out. And it's a protective mechanism, but it takes a bit of a while for it to disappear. And it just, like I said, doesn't mean that you've chosen the wrong flavor or that the baby doesn't particularly like it. So I always say to moms, give it again and give it again and give it again, and they will eventually get used to it. If they start crying, stop the feed immediately. Sometimes what happens is that first feed goes really well and the camera's out and the video's out and they have a ball and everyone gets it on Facebook and YouTube and everything of that first experience. And then next day, mom's all excited and the baby's not interested. And that's so demoralizing, because she's now advertised to the whole world that her baby's on solids, and today he doesn't want to know anything about it.
We're taking a break now.
So then I just say, take a break. Just lay off it and try again the next day. Maybe he's not feeling well. Maybe he just picked a bad time. It's not a fast rule. Once you start, you can have breaks. You don't have to do it every day. Maybe you've had a bad day. You're rushing around and you suddenly remembered, we haven't done the feed today. Relax, do it tomorrow again. You've got a lifetime. Your child's going to eat for a lifetime. You don't have to get it right in that first week.
So if that comes up where you say, okay, I've missed the feed, this baby looks really hungry, solid feed, is it then okay to just give them their milk feed because they haven't had it that day, and that's probably it?
Absolutely fine.
Okay, just one more question before we go for the break. That first meal, you've mentioned homemade, home-cooked, if we can, but mixing it. Do we use the breast milk? Do we now find formula? Do we mix it with water? What do we mix it with when it comes to mixing that homemade porridge or that first foods?
So obviously, like I said, I'm not a great fan of the boxed foods and the cereals and that, because I really think their digestive systems do better on veggies because of the fiber content. A lot of babies get very constipated when we put them onto cereals, so we really don't want to do too much of that. But if you're going to make like a homemade grain, which there are some good grains out there, you can use either formula if your baby's on, or express breast milk. Or if you normally, what I encourage is if you're going to do, for example, like an oat grain or a quinoa grain or one of those, you can cook it up with some water and then just mix it with a bit of fruit. And then you don't necessarily need much milk with it. If you're going to use, for example, sweet potato and you're going to mash it and you feel you need a bit of liquid, again, you can add a bit of breast milk express, a bit of formula, or just a bit of water. You don't want everything also to taste like formula. And if everything eventually has formula added to it, or the breast milk, nothing tastes like the actual food. So, and even add in some fats, which we can talk about just now, is actually a really nice way to soften the food.
So getting some taste and spice in the baby's food. More after the short break. Stay with us. We're still talking about toddler nutrition, weaning. What do you feed them? How do you feed them? And what are the sort of signs that help us through? Back in a moment, so stay with us. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back, a very good day. Thank you, shukran, so much for joining us and staying with us as we chat about toddler nutrition, weaning, when to start solids, how do you start it. Today having Kathy in studio has changed my perspective on how I've been feeding my kids and what is available and thinking what is safe when that's all you've known, but definitely getting some strong advice on the best way to feed our babies, because at the end of the day we need to know, and as Kath said before the break, those with too many labels, too many hands is definitely not good. So that's probably the boxed version. So if we know what is going in and what has been bought, we're on the right track. So looking at enhancing babies' feeds, you spoke about fats, you spoke about proteins, some flavors. I've always been advised and heard, stay away from all of those things when baby is still young. So guide us through that. And I want to now talk about the homemade porridge version, because my guidance was all around what was on the shelves and how we mean to choose that, the first rice or the first maize cereal, and how much should we be giving. So guide us on maybe making a homemade porridge with rice or cooked food, and help us with understanding, what sort of fats and proteins does that mean to be adding in baby's foods, solids.
So really what I would suggest is you start off with a simple veggie like we've discussed, and then you add 1 or 2 other veggies to it, get your 3 meals going, add in some fruit, and get on to about 10 to 15 fruits and veggies, a variety that you feed in your baby.
And when you say 3 meals, does that mean 3 separate meals, not on the same day, right?
3.
Once you establish that.
Yeah, so 3 separate meals. So for example, you would have a breakfast meal, you would have a lunch meal, you would have a supper meal.
And but not on the same day?
Well,
when you're starting?
No, in the beginning you're just going to do 1 meal.
Just to test it,
a once meal, and then after a few days that your baby's comfortable with that meal, you add a second meal, and then maybe a week or 2 later you add your 3rd meal in.
Okay. And this is still with the same type of food?
And but by the time you get to your 2nd or 3rd week, you should have introduced a variety of different fruits and veggies and that. So, but within about 3 weeks, your baby could be on about 10 to 15 different fruits and vegetables that you've tried out, which is quite exciting. So anything from mashed banana, mashed pawpaw, mashed avo, sweet potato, butternut, carrots, broccoli, spinach, beetroot, and you can mix and match. So you can, for example, sweet potato, mix it with some gem squash, or you could have sweet potato mixed with carrots, or you could have butternut and a parsnip, or you could have apple and carrot mixed together. So mix your fruits and your veggies. So be a bit fun and creative with that. When you've hit about the 3rd week and you've got your 3 little meals established of about 15 to 30 mils each, so that's about 1 to 2 tablespoons, then you can add in a fat, and there's some really good healthy fats out there. And fats are really good for your baby's brain, considering that a large percentage of our brain is made up of fat. And you get wonderful fats in the form of coconut fat. Nut butters are a wonderful form of fat and protein. Butter itself, just good old-fashioned butter that you can get, is really nice. You can add full cream yogurt in for breakfast time. For example, mix that with some apples, so plain full cream yogurt mixed with some apple in the morning.
Are these all starter foods?
Yes.
Wow.
Absolutely. And then you can mix in
Sounds
avocado.
Like my meal.
Yeah, it's lovely. And this is, I think, what we're trying to do is we're trying to take feeding your baby away from industry and bring it back to the home, because it's healthier, it's more natural, there's less digestive issues, there's lower risk of allergies, and it's just much more affordable as well, and it's just much more durable because you can almost feed off the family plate.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's exactly from the dinner plate or from what you're giving your kids for breakfast. having the little one who's just been introduced to the family
Absolutely.
be eating exactly the same, and also now getting the family to be eating if you're changing
Correct.
baby's diet to something more natural.
Correct.
So now to get everybody to be on that same
Exactly.
balanced diet. Wow.
So it's such a
Brilliant.
nice time. I always tell moms, this is a nice time. If you like say to me, oh, I can't feed my child what I'm eating because I'm living off fast food or I'm living off takeaways or whatever, then my thing to you is, well, change your diet so that you can feed your baby off your plate, and which is really just natural and unprocessed and as tasty as what you can make it. And then protein foods are really important to introduce, and earlier rather than later. There was a stage when we thought, and I think I mentioned it in the last time we chatted, was keeping like nuts out of a mother's diet or keeping egg out of a mother's diet protects her baby against allergies, and it actually has done the opposite. And it's actually predisposed her baby to allergies by taking away, for example, peanuts out of pregnant mom's diets. And so what we've done now, we're telling moms, put it back in your diet and feed it as early weaning foods. So there was a big study done in Australia. About 5,000 families were involved, 5,000 infants were involved in the study, and where they introduced egg within 4 to 6 months of age. And they drastically reduced the incidence of egg allergy.
And the age of baby? Or
age of baby, so between 4 and 6 months of age of weaning. It was their first weaning food they actually introduced was egg, the whole egg, not just the yolk, the white as well. And that's a lovely protein and fat because it's like an ideal food. It's got your fat is in the yolk and omega-3s, and it's got your white, which is that very rich albumin, which is a wonderful protein food. And you can mash it into food and you can mix it into the veggies, because the texture they're not always wild about in the beginning, but if you mix it in, it's a lovely food. So what you're wanting to achieve kind of is moving from your fruit, your veggies as your meals, and then you're wanting to add in a bit of fat at each meal time, and then you're wanting to add in a bit of protein at each meal time. Now when you add your protein, like egg for example, I always suggest you do it at like midday, because there are foods that your child could potentially have a reaction to, and that doesn't mean because you've introduced it, it just means because they are an allergic child. And so introduce it at a midday so that you've got the afternoon just to observe them, and if they're fine, then you can introduce it again the next day, and if it's still fine, introduce it the next day, and then you can tick that box and say, my child can eat eggs safely. Then you can take that egg and move it to the nighttime feed, and you can add a new protein at lunchtime. So it's a nice rotation process to introduce your protein.
Okay, so now this is a priggy question that comes up for me, being 7 months pregnant and all. Now looking at my last baby that had eczema, very bad eczema, and found out she was allergic to peanuts and egg white and something else. So does that mean, can I and should I then be starting to eat lots of peanuts? And I love peanut butter, but I just don't eat it as much because this isn't much of an appetite. But are you suggesting, would that be a good suggestion in getting egg white and peanuts into my diet as much as I can?
Yes, I really would suggest you do that, because you have this baby is high risk because of its sibling. And I would definitely suggest that you expose her to your other allergen foods now, because this is a very protective way to expose her to it. So as long as you're not allergic to peanuts, if you, as a mom, if you're allergic to something, don't please expose your baby to it, or you, because that's unsafe. But if you're not allergic to it, but your baby, there's a family history or no history, you need to expose. And during your breastfeeding phase is another very safe time to expose your baby to those allergen foods that are potentially higher risk.
Because I wasn't told to not eat those, but all of it from my diet.
You need to
when
eat them.
as well.
You need to. If this little one then shows a reaction whenever you eat peanut butter, then you would only remove it from your diet. Okay, but if she doesn't, removing it is going to only put her at higher risk of having a reaction down the
That's
line.
always the question in the areas the moms are concerned about, am I eating, what I'm eating, affecting my baby, and is it my fault? And that's all the baby's getting is my breast milk.
Yeah, it will only affect your baby if your baby's allergic to it, because it's allergic, not because you've done anything wrong. But like we said, I think in the last segment, we said that the flavors that you take in your pregnancy and in breastfeeding will actually prime your baby for solid introduction. So if you wanting your baby to eat the green stuff, the broccolis, the Brussels sprouts, the cabbage, the spinach, and all that, then you need to expose your baby now. This is the trimester where you want to expose your baby to all those flavors.
Okay.
And then in the breastfeeding phase, go and eat your spinach.
Yes, I'm thinking now I should be changing my diet, because that was going to be a question for me. When breastfeeding, should moms be doing something different to be enhancing baby's feeds now that baby is now on solids and still breastfeeding? Would that help?
Definitely. Okay. Just expose your baby through those different tastes and that.
I want to come back with some porridge guidance and how we can make some homemade porridge, because now this box is definitely going to go out of the door of the shelves. There's so much on the shelves for us to choose from, and that's why we have our pediatric clinical dietitian in studio with us, Kath, and she's helping us guide us through toddler nutrition, but we're going to be seeing her much more on pregnancy to parenting to guide us right through the lives of your little one and hopefully your teenager as well, and yourself and your family. So stay with us. We'll be back after the short break. Welcome back. Very exciting learning about nutrition, toddler nutrition, and I happen to get some advice as well. So thanks so much to Kath, who's hopefully going to be doing a series with us. So don't forget to pose your questions on Pregnancy to Parenting Facebook page. This is beneficial to everybody. Pass on the word, and it can definitely help a mom. Do note also that you can live stream Pregnancy to Parenting on ITV networks.tv if you're not able to watch the show or do not have DSTV, but and you find yourself somewhere around the world, or you're sitting in the office. So live stream ITV networks.co.za with a repeat every Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. Right, Kath, so looking at preparing that homemade porridge, because as I said, that box is going to go definitely out of the door. How do you prepare? Because on the shelves I know there's the rice cereals, there's the maize meals, and the choice to add your milk or water. Guide us through homemaking porridge.
I think again we keep it simple, so try and go for your grains like oats, quinoa, spelt, millet. I think we've been so kind of brainwashed into that there's only one grain out there or two grains maybe out there, and we've actually got quite a range of grains, and then your own rice grains. So and then you cook it up yourself, and you can just blend it in a liquidizer, and it's going to have texture, and that's okay. And I always say to mom, there's a good reason why grains have texture, and it's because of the lovely soft fiber. So don't panic about that. Your baby will get used to it. And then the other thing is, don't make it a huge pot. So your breakfast doesn't have to be this bowl of grain and then a little bit of other things. Make it just like a third of your breakfast with the full cream yogurt and then your fruit. And some raw fruit as well mixed into there. Maybe a bit of nut butter as well, so you've got a bit of protein. So you wanted to make it more of a balanced breakfast or a lunch. It doesn't have to be at breakfast time or at supper, as opposed to this big bowl of starch that you're giving your baby. So you really want to just change the way we've seen starch, and that it can be part of the diet but not the staple of the whole diet. And then you can cook it up with some water, either on a stove or however you would prepare it. Make sure it's got enough water to be absorbed so that it's not hectic and harsh on their little tummy. And then, like I say, start with 1 teaspoon that you've added in. You can freeze it. Cooked grains can be frozen. Moms don't always realize that. And it's nice to know, because it's quite a mission to make them. So make up a batch, freeze
like
them.
making up a tablespoon.
No, exactly. That would drive you insane. So you make up a batch, freeze them in your little ice cube trays, pop them in. Just take out 1 ice cube of grain, mix it with your fruit, mix it with your nut butter or your dairy.
More reason of knowing what to do with your mushed rice when you've overcooked them, which I always do.
Exactly.
So the nut butter you've mentioned.
Nut butter's lovely. You can make your own macadamians, make lovely homemade nut butter. It's very easy. It's easier than some of your other nuts.
But that you're buying on the shelf though?
Well, you can buy macadamia whole,
Okay.
and then you can just blend it in a liquidizer with a little bit of water added to it, or a little bit of olive oil if you want to add in some olive oil.
Okay, so we can have olive oil.
And absolutely, and you can make up your own macadamia nut butter and mix it into any of your veggies or into your fruit. And remember that proteins and fats have a very powerful way of sustaining your baby. So they're lovely to include those at night time when you're wanting them little tummies to be satisfied for a lot longer, to include your proteins and your fats. And they don't need to eat large volumes. Babies have tiny little tummies, they're the size of their fists. And so you can, by giving them fat and protein, they can eat a smaller volume and they get the same amount of calories. And that's really beneficial versus your cereals. So for example, for 1 teaspoon of coconut fat, they would need to eat about 3 tablespoons of rice cereal, as an example. And so it's quite a nice way to conserve energy, is to give them some fat in their food.
So let's look at quickly, I can't believe we're in our last segment, so let's look at quickly the guidance on the honey. We spoke last time about the bacteria and all of that stuff. Is the honey still a no-go now? And what other foods are also no-goes? Because I thought, I didn't realize we can do the olive oil. But okay, so we know olive oil is okay, the nut butters, if there are no allergies.
Yeah, well, again, you would introduce it. If there's a problem and your baby has a reaction, an initial reaction will be probably like a skin rash, or they might just projectile vomit out what you've given them. But if there's no initial reaction, go for it. So introduce with your protein foods, eggs, fish, nut butters, chicken, beef. Introduce those foods. The baby's body and system will tell you if there's going to be a reaction, and then respond. Don't withhold in the fear that there might be a reaction, because you could actually induce a reaction down the line if you withhold those foods from your baby. Because
it's creating that safe environment of knowing that this might be a reaction, have the antihistamine ready or whatever.
You know what, the initial reaction is never hectic like that. So first exposure will give you some reaction if there's going to be, but you generally have good time and you can deal with the reaction. Then you will know, okay, this is a high risk, and you need to then speak to your healthcare professional about that.
I've heard, just quickly in this with regards to taste, and it's probably going to come up again, that I've heard a child needs to try a new food or taste it at least 26 times, spit it out 26 times before that. So lots of patience is needed during this. Is this true? And
it depends, I think, on your child. And at the end,
should you tolerate it?
The advice ranges between kind of 15 and 20, 30 times.
So
but I think it's a lot, and I think it's really just what they're trying to say is it's exposure. And exposure doesn't just have to be in going into the mouth. It can be them watching you eat a food. There's great power in that. It can be, the food needs to be safe for them. And then it depends on the child's personality. You get those slow to warm up babies where they eyeball everything. They're the child at the party that hangs on your skirt until the bitter end, and then just before you're about to leave, they start interacting with the other kids. And you get those children, they take longer to take to new foods when it comes to feeding. You get your little social butterfly or your easygoing child, and they just eat everything and anything that you hand out to them. So it depends on each child, but it does take patience, yes, and it does take development of taste buds and progression and everything like that.
So let's talk about liquid.
Okay.
You've mentioned also about the demand feeding. Before we talk about liquid quickly, demand feeding, should that program now change since you're introducing now solids and it's established? They've got lots of tests and trying different foods as well. So how does that change that demand breastfeeding?
Well, just like demand breastfeeding is for some moms and not for others, demand feeding of solids is for some moms and not for others. So if you're a mom that's done demand feeding, but when it comes to solids, you want more of a routine, you might find that your demand breastfeeding has to shift a bit and become more routine. It is sometimes difficult to fit in solids when you're not sure where the next breastfeed is going to come from. And some moms do it very successfully, so it's very mom and baby dependent. I often find the moms who are demand breastfeeders who love to kind of go with the flow, love to do more like baby-led weaning, where the baby guides as to when they're going to do the solids and that. But I find that initially it is an idea to get into a more solid routine, even if you were demand feeding. So it's a difficult thing to just answer generally, but for each individual mom, you need to look at it and go, what do you need? You might, if it's your first baby, you only have one child, you're at home all day with your child, you can probably continue with demand breastfeeding and just fit your solids in ad hoc through your day.
Okay, so liquids. How do we, or are we now to be introduced? You mentioned a little bit of water with the newborn, just like, for whether it's sour, just to get the wind out. But now we may be introducing it in a cup or a sippy cup or in between that meal, and you're thinking, okay, that food needs to digest. So guide us on liquid and introducing again what we are finding on the shelves, the fruit juices, or if we are making them ourselves, just guide us on liquids and whether they should be water or fruit juices or both or one.
I think firstly your water, like we said, when your child's breastfed exclusively or exclusive milk diet, you generally don't need water unless it's really hot, and that, like we discussed in the last show. When you start solids, however, it is quite good to offer a little bit of fruit juice after the solid meals, just as a little bit of liquid, and you might find your baby's more keen and willing, especially when you start introducing proteins, to offer just under like 10 to 15 mils, and it can be out of a little cup. It doesn't have to be a fancy sippy cup. It can be a sippy cup, can be a straw cup. It can be even out of the bottle. So that really depends on the mom and the child. But it is advisable to offer about 10 to 15 mils after meal time. Fruit juice, I'm quite hectic on that, and I normally say don't introduce it. Fruit juice is not really ever meant to be consumed in that sort of concentrated quantity. And even diluting it, you're really just sending the message to your baby that you need something sweet in order to drink. Let them get used to water. Let them become water lovers. Yes, fruit juice might entice them to drink more, but at the end of the day, having that fruit sugar in such a concentrated form is really not good or safe on their liver.
Are we talking about the market fruit juices that we buy on the shelves?
Market fruit juices particularly, because that really, all that is really just fruit sugar in liquid. There's really nothing else to it. Yeah. And even the natural ones, or they say no artificial sweeteners or no sugar added, the fruit sugar itself, if you think about it, eat one apple and you take a 200 ml box of fruit juice, that's equivalent of about 6 apples of fruit sugar. Without the fiber, without all those other good things that this apple has in. Now, no toddler is going to sit and eat 6 apples in one sitting, but a toddler will down a 200 ml juice. So that just shows you that's not naturally what their bodies were not made to consume that amount. And it can cause many long-term problems, which I'm sure we can talk about in future shows.
There's so much now that has come up. Unfortunately, we literally have 30 seconds left, and we have to wrap up. I think just to leave our viewers with just assurance on brief toddler nutrition, and when we next meet again, we're going to follow up on the types of foods and what's in there. You've mentioned fructose in the break as well. I wanted to break it down, but just quickly in 30 seconds, just to wrap up mom's reassurance on toddler nutrition.
So I think the best is keep it simple, keep it natural, go for unprocessed, try homemade as much as possible, and if it means eating off the family plate from good wholesome vegetables and fruit, which are great starter foods, go for it. Raw fruit is great. Don't be scared to give a raw mashed banana, raw pawpaw, raw avo as starter foods. Those are absolutely wonderful. And make it fun. Okay, it's really about that. They've got to eat for a lifetime.
Yes, and I know. Literally, they say, put down the newspaper on the ground. Maybe that's what you should be doing, and have fun. Have fun. Thank you so much, Kath. We'll hopefully see you again very soon, and we'll follow up on basic nutrition when it comes to your little one, 12 months plus. And any questions, please do post them on our Pregnancy to Parenting page. Don't forget to visit nutripeds.co.za. They're based out in Cape Town and Johannesburg. Thank you so much for joining us. Please do continue watching Pregnancy to Parenting with a repeat on Saturday at 10 a.m. Wassalamu alaikum, and a very good day to you.